Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome. This is Jeremiah. We are having another fantastic webinar today. We are going to be setting up planting, getting it all configured and matching your standards. Going to be really helpful and instructional. I'm going to tell you two quick housekeeping items about these webinars. The first is at the very top of your screen. There's a little view options. I sure like to click that and exit full screen, just knowing that that's where that is, just in case you do need to get to anything else. And secondly, there is a Q&A box, a little button in your upper left. Do familiarize yourself with where that is, and feel free to type in any number of questions. We got myself and Jake and others here as necessary to get those questions answered and routed over to Amanda to answer as well. So that all being said, we have a very full schedule of what we're going to be covering today, and I'm going to just get this right over to Amanda.
Thank you, Jeremiah, and thank you to everybody for joining today. So let's get into the presentation. This is me, and in case you haven't talked to me on the phone yet, I'm a landscape architect with the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects. I've worked in the private sector for 6 years and land effects for almost 3. One of my first tasks at my very first job out of school was actually figuring out exactly what we're going through today, which is setting up planting effects for my office's standards. So we have a full plate today, diving into the nuts and bolts of how the planting tool magic works and how you can harness that to fine-tune and ultimately control how you or your office produces your plants. We're actually going to start with a few customizing items. We're going to go through considering what you want to do when you're starting with planting FX, and kind of going into customizing all of your styles. So this webinar is geared to those who are in a multi-user office and will be responsible for managing your CAD and your land effects standards, or for sole practitioners looking to get the planting FX output looking exactly how you want it. So be sure to load up the question box with all of your questions. We want to make sure we cover what everybody is curious about today. So kind of going back to this, we're starting today with a key scenario. You've either already started a trial or bought land FX, planting FX, and you're trying to make the jump into actually using it on a project. You've installed planting FX on your FX CAD or AutoCAD. If you need help with this, or our install guides are really great, and our technical support is too. So you can either submit a ticket or give us a call. Just really quickly on this, planting FX includes all the planting and the detail and site tools. You can also do this with our irrigation FX license, because irrigation FX also includes the planting tools. After that, the very first thing I'm assuming you've already done, you've tried to recreate an old project using the land effects default settings. And you've dabbled a bit in the basic planting tools like adding and placing plants, callouts, and schedules. This is critical for the very first thing in our what to consider when starting with planting FX list, which is what is holding you back? What do you need to consider? What is making the question if this is the best fit? What is making you question if this is the best fit, or having everybody in the office start using land effects on all of your projects right now? What is your greatest concern? Maybe it's the IT department, maybe it's just being unsure how to implement it. Again, our tech support can help with this, but in this webinar, we're gonna focus on the most common concern. It doesn't look the way my plans look out of the box. The only way you can see this is by redoing a project with completely default settings and making a list of what's different from your old norm. Once you do that, the most frequent question is, what can I do to make land effects match my standard? But the most important thing you need to understand about this is that the more you customize your land effects defaults, the more customizing work is needed. This might seem like I'm being Captain Obvious here, but it deserves saying. There are very few style standards that can't be reconsidered when the time equals money equation gets brought up. For instance, if we go into some examples, do you really need a totally custom plant callout besides the 15 that we already offer and we'll be going through today? How many of your custom plant symbols do you think could be swapped with one of the thousands that Land Effects already offers? I have here just a really quick smattering that I got off of Google of some examples of very customized plant callouts here. And here I have just 3 of our 21 pages of plant symbols for trees and shrubs that are already saved into the system. You can actually grab these. We now have them available on these handy sheets for you to print out at the link down here below in our graphic binder that you can actually print out now. But when you're kind of going through these, considering that a lot of these really fine, we've given a lot of consideration in terms of the symbols that we've already placed in the software. And we'll talk a bit more about how you can save some of these custom ones in, but each custom one that you save into the system is going to take you some time, one of your employees' time to save it in. And so is that time better spent just jumping in and using the software with the defaults and kind of balancing that decision? Also, with your plant schedule styles, which we're going to be going over. Again, this is an example that I kind of pulled off the internet of a very traditional kind of style you might get if you're doing AutoCAD manually for your planting plans. This is, I've kind of gone through and done the closest I can get to this style using the Land Effects default standards. There's a few things that are a little bit different, such as in this landscape plan, the spacing is in feet. In this one, it's in inches. The quantity is right between the name and the size here. Over here, the best I could really do was get it before the name. The other location it would go is at the very end of the schedule. This one has more simplified headings where this is all cut out, whereas this one has all of your headers all throughout. That's just kind of the basics of how Land Effects works. So you need to make a consideration here. You can absolutely edit this block. This schedule just comes in as a regular old block. So you can go in here and every time you place a schedule, automatically, very quickly, you can go in and edit it just like any other block. But that's about 5 to 10 minutes of manual editing every time you generate a schedule. Would you rather spend that time, that 10 minutes making this schedule look exactly like you used to have schedules? Or is this actually really good for the purposes you need it for, and you would rather spend that 10 minutes focused on the quality of your design work instead? So just kind of putting this out there right at the beginning, think critically and consider which style standards were made up initially because CAD drafting without Land Effects was tedious and not automatic. With that all in mind, let's look at the most common and totally valid style concerns and show you how to tackle them. So the very first thing we're going to go into is plant size preferences. We're going to go over here into AutoCAD. And you can see I have a plan kind of started over here in order to show you some of the default settings. And if we go over into our FX planting ribbon and look at our manager, and I'll pull that over a bit. Over here, I can kind of edit any one of these plants that I've already added in. I'm going to go in and edit them. Again, if you need help learning how to place these plants in, we have some other already recorded webinars that can definitely get you along those lines to get to this point. But I already have this plant kind of set up, and you can see I'm using some of the default sizes. I'm using the default metric size options in here, and you can see all the ones I can add in here, but you can see I also have a lot of fields that are empty and available to use. And so this size field kind of matches up with the size that goes in here. And if I go and place a schedule really quickly to show you how those sizes line up in the schedule, just so that when we look at the back end, you can see where it's all coming from. We're just going to really quickly place this down here, and you can see there's that size and that container from when I edit this plant. Size and container type listed right in here. So if I go into my backend, we're going to go up here again, FX planting ribbon. You can also access this from the FX admin ribbon, but I'm just going to drop down and go over to plant size preferences. And we'll have a look at this. So here in plant size preferences, you can see for my trees, here's my size and my container type. And these are completely editable. So this title over here corresponds to the title in the schedule. And this is technically called field 1 and field 2. Now you can add in more fields in here. So for instance, I can go in and let's go in. I can add up to 6 columns of completely customized fields in here. So this is something you want to look at the beginning of your plan and kind of go into. But I can say add a 3rd field just down here. And now I have a field 3 to start playing with. So you can add anything into here. So say this is kind of a California type plan. California has some water standards and really usually requires people to show WUCLs, which is basically the standard of how much water use a plant type uses. And I'll just put the title in here. Over here, and now I can go in and let's just go in here. So this is all completely blank as opposed to these, which are have stuff in it. I can now go into here and start adding new fields for me to use. So usually we have the H for high, we have M for medium, we have L for low, and very low. So suddenly I've got all of my sizes and standards for my trees all set up in here. And I can actually go in, I can delete these, I can edit them however I want. But if I go and click OK, and now I go back to that tree and edit it, you can see I now have that WUCLs option in here. I can set this to something like medium maybe for this tree, say OK, and then regenerate this schedule. And now you can see that that option is now populating into the schedule. So when I go into these plant sizes, if I go in here, you can see I have options for all of my shrubs, shrub areas, ground covers, and my trees. And they're all separate so that they function separately. You can add different size standards to your shrubs than you do for your trees. So with all of that set up, I can go into my, let's see, I'm in plant sizes. So I can go in and set up all of my plant sizes to exactly how I want them. There are some limitations to this, which is that if you go into trees and say I decide in trees I want to add something like height. I can go in here and add a 4th column and start putting in height. But let's say I actually wanted my height to be in my 3rd column instead. What you can't do is switch these 2 around. you would need to go in here and say, okay, let's move all of my woot goals into here. You'd have to type it all in for woot goals and fill all of this back in, clicking in this section, adding them all back in here, going into this section, deleting them from here, and changing this to height and adding in all of the new height options. So that's a little limitation, which is why you want to really consider how you're going to pull this off before you start into it. So that once you've actually saved everything in, it's all correct and you won't have too many changes coming down the line. The next thing that we're gonna kind of go into, so that's plant sizes, is actually these plant symbols. So let's kind of look at what we have for trees. If I edit this tree and click edit, click on the symbol, it brings up all of my default symbol types. Like I said, we have thousands saved in here, but if I go between them, you can see all of these different ones. And we strive to add as many of the common plant symbols as possible, but we might be missing one or two that are unique to your style or a specific plant that if you we just don't have something that really fits what you're trying to use. We do have a way for you to add those so that you can make your own blocks smart too. So if I go into, let's see, if I go out of here, a tree block. I'm going to kind of close out of here so I have a little bit more space. I have a tree block all set up and ready to rock. And if I go in here, I can save this block. So right now it's just regular lines and arcs and polylines, all saved on different layers for different line weight quality. That's basically how all of our blocks are set up. You can kind of copy our layer state if you like by going into the FX admin and finding that layer state up here so that you can start drafting on those layers. But it's really, really easy. All you have to do is save this block in. I'll show you how these blocks actually save in before I save this in. If I go into here and I go and we're going to edit that plant and kind of look at here. So these are my general symbol types. And if we go into the back end of my system, into my C drive, your LandFX folder might be on your C drive, it might be on your server, wherever you've saved it. If I go into blocks, and my plant blocks are all saved under graphics. Your blocks folder are where all of these blocks are going to be saved in our system. I go into graphics and now planting, and I have trees, shrubs, and my color stuff. I'm going to go into trees because that's the section I'm in right now. And you can see in here, if I kind of pull this in, there's my simple folder, my evergreen folder, my deciduous folder. And you can see now how they're organized as well. There's this hidden number at the beginning that dictates what order they go in. You could, once we go into, say, the simple, you can kind of see all of the files that are in the back end. So you have your DWG, which is the actual block that gets pulled into the drawing, and the LandFX data gets assigned to it. You have an SLD file, which is your slide file, which is this right here. This is actually not a preview of the drawing. It's actually showing this slide file. It's like an image file. And then the XML is the data associated with that block so that it all scales correctly and comes in correctly. So you could, there are ways to kind of batch save in a bunch of your old DWGs if you do have your old blocks all organized. We have a great page and video on how to do that. But what we're going to go through is actually just saving in one or two blocks in individually for the sake of time. So you can go ahead and save new blocks into this folder, this simple folder, or you can make your own. So if I go to trees, I can actually go in here and make a new folder. And I'm going to call this 00. And so that it pulls to the front of the list, and the dash, and that's all, 00. 00 dash, that's all going to be hidden. And let's go with your company name. Keeping in mind, keep this pretty short. And now there's nothing in here right now. But if I go back into here and open this up, I now have a blank company section. So let's go ahead and save that plant block into that section. All I need to do is go over here under FX planting, drop down, and I have the save plant block option. And I'm going to click on that and follow the command line prompts down here. It's telling me what to do. So the very first thing it wants is an insertion point. So I'm going to turn on my O snaps with F3, and I'm going to zoom in here and snap to the center of this. I'm going to select all of my objects and right click to accept all of them. And now it's pulling up, where do you want to save this? So yes, I want to save this in trees because it's a tree. I want to save it in my company folder. And I'm going to give it a name. So let's give this a company dash tree dash 001. Again, you have to keep this name fairly short. There is a limit. If you go over, the system will tell you if the name is too long. And you'll have to consider either renaming your folder or this, it's a combination of the two. So I'm going to save. And we have this in here, and I can actually show you how to reshoot that slide file because that was done absolutely terribly. But we'll do that in a second. I'm going to call this just tree 001. You want to keep these settings here and keep these units to blank like this for a plant symbol. It's different for other blocks that you save into land effects, but for these are the settings you need for the tree. I'm going to say OK. And that's saved in. And if I go over here and let's edit that plant, I can now actually go in and see that file. Let's fix up that slide really quick because that happened. A little bit of troubleshooting along the way never hurt anybody. In order to get the right slide type, I always just really quickly grab my properties palette that I always have up and kind of get the actual model space to be about the same size as the slide file that you saw, that preview over here under all the plants. So if I go into here, I'm just gonna kind of zoom extents so it fills up the space. I'm going to type mslide. And I'm gonna go really quickly into that C drive. If I was actually in the block again, opened up the block again from where it was saved in my land effects folder, it would automatically go to the right folder. Let's go to blocks, graphics, planting, trees, company. There it is, slide, resave that. Yes. Okay. So now if I go back into here, and we'll pull this back. I can go ahead and let's go into here. I can grab this tree, edit this plant, and switch it over to that company file that's now saved in here. I'm gonna say OK, and say OK, and it's gonna switch out all my trees with that new symbol type. And it's a smart symbol, so if I edit that symbol, it's now got all of that land effects data attached to it. So I can go ahead and I can call it out. I can go and regenerate this schedule. and it's going to flip out this symbol into the schedule as well. So now you can start using all of your own plant blocks in here with some things in mind. Again, I said that we have optimized a lot of our symbols. Keep in mind that especially on shrubs, if you use a lot of line work in it, it's going to possibly, if you have a lot of shrubs with a lot of line works, like really heavy symbols in them. I did have a problem with a client recently where their PDFs blew up because PDFs are vector-based. All of that line work adds more vector data. It blew up the size of the PDF, and a really simple solution was just to start using simpler shrub graphics. So keep that in mind as you're going along in order to optimize your CAD, and consider whether your old style standards were actually working very well for you. So with customizing those symbols, just really quickly, I wanted to mention for shrub areas. Shrub areas in Land Effects uses hatches like this. We'll go with that. And ground covers do too. And you have all of these hatches in order for you to use. You can actually save in your own hatches if you have the PAT file, but for respect for time for this webinar, I'm going to leave that to our very clear documentation page, which you can find here. I'm at landeffects.com. If I go over to support and knowledge base, and just type in any search term like save hatch, I can go to that page and go through everything and follow all of these directions in order to save your hatches into Land Effects so that those can be smart as well, and save that in. Also consider if you are adding in a lot of symbols into Land Effects or hatches into Land Effects that you feel that we are missing, we really want to hear about what we're missing, and we'll usually put those on a list to supplement the defaults to help improve the program. So definitely give your input if you feel that the program could improve with more graphics. So this would be a great spot to kind of stop for a second and address any of the, whoa, I see many questions coming in.
Yeah, oh yeah, Jake and I have been busy typing answers to everybody. We haven't gotten everyone answered, so not too much we necessarily need to pause for, but some good ones that might be good. For instance, a number of people asking about if they can assign the same symbol to multiple plants. So I've mentioned in a couple of cases that that's definitely not a recommended practice, and that using, for instance, some of our diagrammatic symbols would be better. But it does seem that a lot of people are working with incorporating their existing symbols, which either might be less symbol options or might even be dynamic symbols. And so there's some teething pains to that. But I don't know if you have any further comments on that, Amanda.
Yeah, I'll probably mention that my office used to use pretty much, I was one of the people who used almost always circle symbols for almost everything. Usually it was actually the good old circle with cross for proposed planting. I eventually kind of came around and started using more of these symbol types that we have available, as well as some that we had saved in, only because the whole using the circle with the cross is a leftover from manual AutoCAD, when it was difficult to maintain and bring in all of these different symbol types. You had to maintain a very complex template drawing in order to accomplish that. Whereas with this system, all you have to do is, it's actually just as simple to choose any symbol in here to assign to a plant as it is for that circle symbol. And then you get the added benefit of having different symbol types in the plan, having a more legible plan. So I would suggest reconsidering that. As somebody who has been converted, I also suggest coming over to the light side and changing your stance on that, because it's kind of a carryover from when things were hard. But let's kind of move on, and we're going to go into another area that a lot of people end up going towards, which is customizing these plant symbol callouts. So I had mentioned before that we have a lot of great callouts already in the system. I'm going to drop this down and go back into my planting preferences now instead of plant size preferences. So here in planting preferences, we have a lot of preferences that you can kind of use. You can change the default of the code that comes in on these labels, and in the schedule to have just 2 letters instead of 6. You can also, the code inside a plant is completely editable, as is its entire name and almost anything about it. So you can actually have a 4-letter code or a 3-letter code if you want to. It's totally up to you. It can use letters, it can use letters and numbers, it can just be numbers, whatever you want. So that's what you can do here. I tend to suggest going with the 6-letter code, only because, again, from developing our standards, what we decided was that pretty much any contractor or city official worth their salt would be able to tell generally what plants are which by the 6-letter codes, whereas if you go into these 2-letter codes down here, it's a guessing game. So it was a lot more efficient for our plans, especially reading them on the field on a windy day, to have the 6-letter codes. Just my 2 cents in there. But as we kind of go through here, you can look at a lot of these. We're going to kind of talk about mostly just this plant label style, though. You can change the arrow style. You can change how the extension line behaves. You can also change what this label looks like. And like I said, we have 15 great defaults already set in here that you can just go in and choose the one that's closest to what you want and go with it if you like. So that's a really easy way to start using land effects out of the box and planting effects out of the box. But maybe you want to have a little bit more information in here, have one of these symbol styles with a different set of information. You like this one with the line, but you want it with something completely different. Whatever you want, these are totally editable, and they're very smart, and you can add a lot of information into them or as little information as you need. So let's go with the one that I have selected here and have been using in this plan, which is our label 08. I'm going to keep using that one. And we're going to go ahead and open the label files. Before I open that label file, I want to really quickly show how these work. So if I just go into, again, this is a little bit backdoor information, or background information, that's what I mean. If I go into this label and just explode it, that's the X for explode, you can see it totally changes. It's actually just lines and attributes. That's all it is. And so once it gets pulled into this drawing and made into a block, the attributes pull the data that get assigned from the block and they populate themselves. So it's like if you've used an attribute block before, you would have placed this block in and then manually had to type in all of this information. Land Effects does it automatically. So with that in mind, if we go in and edit this and open those label files, it's going to open up the left label file and the right label file. These both allow you to flip back and forth between your different sides of your label style. This is actually why we don't use M leaders yet. We really want to. The only problem is AutoCAD has a limitation with M leaders in that you can't have this asymmetric type of call out. So that's why we've still stuck with the system we have. We do have a way to manipulate callouts in an M leader kind of way. Have a great power tip for that. Ask us if you like the link if you can't find it. But anyways, going into here, you have your attributes and your lines just like we saw over here. And these are totally changeable. So if we go into our website, I'm going to go back to our website. I'm going to go back to our knowledge base. And I'm going to type in attribute. And we got here the attribute definitions for plant labels. And if I go down through here, you can find out more about how they work, how you can create them yourself, which we'll kind of go through. But here you can see the types of attributes that you actually can use. So there's that QTY attribute, gets your quantity. Botanical gets your botanical name. I suggest using these new attributes. If you have an older installation, these are the ones that your label files are going to come up as. I suggest starting to use these as well and considering getting our latest plant callouts as well. If your default plant callouts don't look like the ones I just showed. We have a lot of options in terms of the fields you can put in. You can put in all 6 fields in a callout if you really want to. But as we kind of go, back into here, so you can completely manipulate that. You can also put in some extra languages if you need to. But let's go in here and just do something like grabbing this attribute and changing it to common instead. You don't have to change the prompt if you're just changing something. You can just go with that. And then let's save that. Save, go back to my plan. And I'm going to now do a redefine block. So that's redefine block. We're going to grab this one and click OK. It's going to wipe these out, but don't worry. I'm just going to run a verify labels. I'm going to ignore all of that for now. And Bob's your uncle, you have common names on all of these right-handed callouts. Obviously, I didn't change the left callout over here. It's still here with my GenSpy. So keep in mind, as you're making changes to one callout file, you need to make them to the other as well in whatever order you want, keeping your justification correct. If you're having problems with these, make sure that all of those settings are correct. But I can also add an additional, say I want to add another attribute down here for field 2, or I can go ahead and make an attribute. So let's go and do that. I'm going to go to FX Site, and I'm going to go to Text, and I'm going to grab my plant callout text style that is already saved into the system. And we've been using the stylus ITC bold. It hasn't made its way into the plant callouts, but it does actually automatically choose that when you place the callout in the plan. I'll point it out once we go back there. It's a really great one. It's basically a bold version of Stylus BT that is in everybody's installation now. If you'd like to start using that, just make sure you run the latest workstation installer and you'll get it. So I'm going to say a text, not mtext. You must make attributes from a text object. We're going to click that in, make it 0. I'm going to call this caps lock field 2. And it came in a little big because this file is not scaled. It's just a regular block file. I'm going to make this match the same size, height as the other one, which is about 0.1, I believe. Got my field 2 right there. And I'm gonna do an F8 to get off of ortho and kind of line it up. Obviously, you would line it up a lot more accurately. And we're gonna save that and go into my plan. Again, ooh, Stylus ITC bold. But I could go in and this is gonna be a little trickier than the last time. We're gonna redefine the block. And that's going to come in here, but this is going to say field 2. And even if I run a verify callouts, it's still going to say field 2. If you add a new attribute into one of these, you do need to go in here and just really quickly add another label in order to get it to read that. Oh, you know what I did? I did not actually make it into an attribute. It's still a text. Okay. Amanda, get back in the game. Here we go. Text to a trib is what we need to do. Text to a trib. And that's why it needs to be a text object. I'm going to click on that. This is all going to come up. that's great. You don't need to change anything because you're not going to get a prompt, so you don't need to fill in the prompt. I'm just going to say okay. And that's now an attribute. And I can then save that, save, go into here. And we're going to grab, redefine block. Grab that one, okay. And now I'm gonna go back in here and place a label and immediately just delete it because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to verify labels, and all of those field twos are gonna come in. Obviously, I now need to go in here and maybe use my group label to move these around a bit, like that, but pretty good in terms of that. Again, you need to do the same thing for your left ones. But I can also do one more thing, which is a very common question, is if I'm in this plan over here, what if I'm not labeling in paper space like I've done here? I'm labeling in model space, and I want to have a background mask on this long common name. Let's draw a polyline. You have some polylines around it, like so, and we'll send that to the back. Draw order, send to back. You can't really read that stuff. You want a background mask that is dynamic and goes with it, because if you just add a background mask of a hatch, that's static and the common name can go pretty long. So you want a background mask that goes with it. You can actually add background masks to attributes. So if I go over here into my right label, I'm just going to go into my common. I'm going to go to my properties, which I always have open, and go to this under miscellaneous, this multiple setting, and set that to yes. And now when I double click on it, I get these three little dots over here, and I can click on that. This goes away, but don't panic. I'm just going to go down to options, and I'm going to go to background mask. I'm going to say use a background mask. I want this to be about 1. Sometimes it comes in by default at 1.5. I'm going to say use background color, and I'm going to say okay. And then I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to say okay again. My comment comes back. Everybody's happy. And we go over to save that, go back into LandFX export, and we're going to redefine this block one last time. And now I have that background mask on here, and it's dynamic with the label. So those are the ways that you can kind of update your new callouts. If you want an attribute option that is not in here and we haven't thought of yet, go down here, send in a ticket from with our technical support button, and tell us what you want. If I can't even think of one because we have a lot in here, but if you're like, you're really missing this, it would help me for this reason, absolutely, we'll listen and consider it. So the last thing we want to do before we kind of go into, okay, how do we use all of this stuff, is our plant schedule templates. So I've created a schedule over here, and this is actually using our default schedule that comes out of the box. This is the style that comes with it. But when you place a schedule, you have a lot of options. You can change them around. We're going to go over those. But you might want to be like, well, I want this to happen every time I start a plan, because every time you start a plan, it's going to go with the default schedule style and schedule options. You can actually change that in your planting preferences. If I go back to my planting preferences, I have under here schedule defaults. I open that up, it looks exactly like when I was going to place a schedule, only pressing OK here doesn't place a schedule. It saves these options into here so that then every time you open up a drawing on any computer in your office using this preference set, it's going to use a certain style. So you can change this to table, you can include costs, you can put symbols at plan size, you can change how your common and botanical names appear. You can change if the code or the symbol or neither of those appear. And you can also change what categories are included, any of these options, how it's sorted, basically anything in here you can include in your defaults. So let's look at some of those options that you can do. So I'm going to go back over here. And let's have a look at those. So this is actually my default, the one that we just saw there. These are the schedule options that come out of the box with Land Effects for you to use. If we go to another type of style, it looks completely different. So you can do that table style. You can put your remarks below the name. So over here, I have it coming below the name as opposed to back here where the remarks were in its own separate column. That makes it kind of wide. Below the name keeps the schedule a little tighter. And you can also sort by common name instead of by botanical name. Maybe you want your common name to come before your botanical name. You can change it so that some sections show code and other sections show symbol. So that's some things that you can do. Let's look at another style. We have here, our symbols are at plan size, as well as our botanical name is over our common name. I have some space in between the plants, so you get a lot of space to be able to see all of those symbols. I've set the entire thing to symbol. I've also done this plan without any quantities. So this is more of maybe if you don't really show that sort of thing in your plan, maybe you're a design build firm and this is a concept plan that, or not a concept plan, but like you want to give out this plan and not necessarily have your quantities in there and keep your cards close to your chest, which is totally valid. You can absolutely do that. But this kind of style gets a little long, so you can make a really quick change and make it shorter by just undoing space between plants. If you keep your symbols at plan size, this is what it's going to look like. Those trees are going to squish together. Maybe that's what you want. You want to save that space. You can also just do a single section, so just shrubs. With my botanical and common name, you can sort by code. It didn't happen to change the order here. You can uncheck this detail columns if you're not using the details for whatever reason. And you can uncheck remarks entirely. And you can also put that quantity before the name, like we talked about before, instead of on all of these other ones, the quantity was near the end right before details. Lastly, something completely different, you can do a full schedule with table style, including your fields. So here I just turned on the sun options. These are totally editable for any plants in your project. If maybe you decide that something in here is incorrect, please tell us as well that if you feel it's incorrect so that we can correct it. But you can also just instantly correct it for yourself and show it here in your schedule. And this is what it looks like. I've also, this is what symbols not at plan size looks like. So they are still kind of variable, but they are a little different. And we've done symbol and common and table. So those are some of the options that you can do. We have another page with a lot more options, and basically you can mix and match all of these options to your own desire, keeping in mind that it does come to a limit of what you can do with the schedule and what we've been able to program in to keep this flexible for everybody's style. And sometimes if you really feel that you have to do something manually, there is that option. You can edit that block, but keep in mind it won't be an automatic thing and you'll have to spend that time each time. The last, very, very last thing we wanted to kind of go through was now that you've set up all of these plans, you might have all of these styles, you might have this other holdup, which is I've already started some plans and I'm on a deadline. So maybe after those. Well, you can actually convert them now that you have all of these styles set up and just continue on with that plan from exactly the point that you're at. So let's have a look at that. I'm going to go over here into this file and I'm going to close out some things. Awesome. So I have this plan. I've brought in my XREF. I've started to place some blocks already. Maybe you have some callouts already kind of splattered around of your old manual way of doing things. Let's kind of consider just starting to convert this and moving forward with it with land effects. I can easily go in here and go to my plant manager. I've already started a blank project. Jake went over the value of projects and how to use them and new projects for every design you do in last week's webinar. The recording is up on our website. If you haven't checked it out, I'd absolutely recommend it. It's a great companion to this webinar. But so I have a blank project here, and so I want to convert these. These are actually dumb blocks. They look like, I just use the stuff from our generic plants section. That brings them in as just regular old blocks without any data, and I can tell they don't have data by clicking Edit Plant. And if I click on it, it's gonna say, oh, you must first save this block into the Plan Graphics library before you can use it. You probably, if you're on a deadline, maybe you want to use some of our defaults. So you wouldn't necessarily do this. You want to instead convert all of these blocks to our plants. So let's go ahead and do that. You can either go and start adding new plants in here and building up this, but maybe you've dabbled a bit and you have a library already kind of going in some other test projects, and you want to quickly pull a plant from over there. I'm just going to grab import. And I can either grab from this other project that I've done, or I can grab from this commercial, say, okay, I'll just grab, let's see, we'll grab that ulmus, and we'll grab a quercus. Oh, we'll grab a quercus. Oh, not that one, ulmus, there we go. Add those to the project, done. Okay, I'm gonna import a shrub. Okay, I'll grab Paradise, add that to the project. And I'm basically just simulating you adding your own plants into here. Sure, we'll go with that one, add that to the project, done. Okay, now we can start just moving this plan into land effects now that those plants are in. I can go and just grab this one. I'm going to edit it, make sure it has a symbol assigned to it. I can even, hey, assign my company symbol that I saved into the system. And I can go ahead and place that. I'm just going to place one. And then I'm going to go over here, FX planting, under match. I'm going to drop this down, go to match properties. We're going to grab that one and click, and yes. And I'll do that again one last time. So I click that, place that down, match properties, click the one I want to match, click the destination, and it asks me, do I want to apply this to all 3 instances of this block? I'm gonna say yes. And it switches them immediately. And now I can just delete these dummy ones. I can now edit these plants. They're real plants. I can label these plants. And I can go in and run a schedule of these plants. Very quickly, I'm moving this plan along with land effects. So I hope today that we've kind of covered all of the holdups that you guys might be having in terms of just that, getting over that wall of being able to start using your planting FX tools on an actual project and starting to use it and getting the value off of the software, whether you're in a trial or you've purchased it. So that's basically everything I wanted to cover today. And let's see if we have any questions that we can go over.
You bet. We definitely have a lot of questions, and feel free to, we got plenty of minutes here if you want to get in some last ones that maybe you didn't feel got answered enough. The one I would definitely pass along is, we've got a number of people, asking about some things which for instance are not possible in the software. For instance, putting the symbol automatically in the plant call out, or sorting, or in the plant schedule, having the container size appear before the name rather than after the name. So those are 2 notable ones that got mentioned by a couple of people. And I think, my immediate comment was back to your first comment, which is, assessing your actual standard, and what are you actually after, and what is a quote unquote requirement. But I don't know if you had some comments on those sorts of requests.
Yeah, I know it's having been in that boat before, it can be difficult to look past the trees to see the forest, basically, which is if you have your size before your code or before your name or something like that, is it really going to be that big of a holdup that you're going to spend that amount of time? Like you're going to spend and commit to spending 10 to 15 minutes every single time you place a schedule to move the size over to before the code or the name. And I know that sometimes like a lot of things that ran through my own head was, oh, well, like contractors, they're so dumb. I have to do it so that they actually pay attention to what I've done. My response to that, based on kind of going through everything, has been now, well, it sounds to me like I need a different contractor. If they're not following something that's very clearly on the plan, we can't spoon feed them everything. It is very clear on there, whether it's in one section of the schedule or another. Yeah, potato. But you want to be able to say, okay, I really actually want to spend my time on my design instead of CADing around and mudding around in CAD. So to be able to take all of that and then step back and say, okay, so if my size were over here, is it really going to be the end of the world? And or is the time to take it to move it actually going to be worth it, as opposed to using that time on something maybe more valuable? And it's that time equals money equation that you need to think of when assessing your own standards. Because remember that I like to say style standards instead of standards, because it is actually a style and your standards were developed to fit what was needed for the plan based on the conditions of how you were able to draw the plan. And so those are manipulatable, but you can manipulate them. It's basically what I'm saying. And moving into a new software is a great time to stand back and assess and decide if this is something that you can change. But I think with that, there were quite a few questions. If there are any additional questions, I do recommend going up here into your land effects or on our website, going to support and submitting a technical support ticket, asking us and saying, if you want to say, no, I really need this and this is for this reason, then we are all ears and totally tell us. But also ask your questions of, I wanted to change this and you didn't quite cover it. How do I do that? We can also help point you in the right direction if you aren't able to search our website like I showed you in this webinar today. But other than that, I think we are good to call this a day and hope everybody has a fantastic weekend.